So, welcome to this podcast. It is with Fiona Allison, the publisher of the Learning Development Journals at Emerald Publishing, and the collective known as the Brain Ladies. 3 out of the 4 members are with us, and I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves one by one, starting with Stella, and then Ria, and then Margie.
Hello everybody, I'm Stella Collins from Stella Learning, author of Neuroscience for Learning and Development, and I am one of the Brain Ladies. Over to you, Ria.
Yes, I'm Ria van Dinteren. I'm also one of the Brain Ladies. Very excited to be a part of this group. I've got my own company, and the thing that I love the most is to apply neuroscience in the field of learning and development.
Thank you, Ria. And I am Margie Meacham. I'm the Chief Freedom Officer of my company, which is Learning to Go, and one of the Brain Ladies. And the reason we're all here is we are so passionate about applying learning science to help people learn. Back to you, Fiona.
And can I just introduce our other colleague who isn't with us today, who's Katelijn Niesmans of The Tipping Point in Belgium. And she too is passionate about how to apply neuroscience and psychology and evidence-based science to learning and development and people development.
Thank you, everyone. And I believe Kat did send her apologies, and that's absolutely fine. We have 3 out of 4, so that's super.
And being Katelijn, she also sent her love.
Oh, that's lovely. So what I'd like to start with asking is, what for each of you inspired this collective known as the Brain Ladies to form? And again, I'd like to start with you, Stella.
Well, for me, it was, I met Katelijn at a program, a summer school I was running on neuroscience. She was one of the participants, and we just really hit it off because we had so much in common. And really, for me, it was her enthusiasm and invitation to say, look, I already know a few other people who are interested in the brain. It just so happens we're all ladies. So it was really lovely to be able to connect with other people who have that same passion, but also to have that, to be able to connect across different countries and internationally has been really interesting.
Okay, so now it's working. Thank you, Stella. Yeah, I think it's really a pity that Katelijn isn't here, because she also brought me with the Brain Ladies. And I met her actually at a congress where I was a speaker and she was a speaker, and she took the initiative to invite us all for dinner, just to talk about the brain. And actually that was a very exciting evening, and she said, you have to meet Stella, and we have to work together internationally, and I would love to bring you all together. So it's really her doing that we are the Brain Ladies now, and well, it's really fantastic that we share the same passion. So if we are talking about the brain, it's always in depth, and we come across the same problems, each and every one of us in our own country and work. So Margie, you.
Yes, I agree. While I had actually been calling myself the Brain Lady prior to meeting these folks, it was really Katelijn when we were at a conference together, and we connected and realized how much we had in common. And a few months later, or actually maybe a little longer than that, she said, think about a group of Brain Ladies, and I just loved the idea. And I said at the time, it kind of reminds me of the 4 tenors. I kind of like that idea that we each have our own voice, but we are singing together, and we're singing about the brain.
That's a lovely analogy there, Margie. It's really good. Well, I'd also like to know, and to introduce people a bit more to this topic, and I'm going to go straight back to you, Margie. Is how is neuroscience relative to work, and how can it be applied in the workplace in relation to learning and development?
We get asked that all the time, Fiona, and I think to those who are scholar practitioners, we see it very evidently, but it's still a question that we need to answer because not everybody immediately sees the benefit. Learning and changing behavior, all of that is driven by the brain. As a matter of fact, everything you do, including breathing, is generated by your wonderful, amazing brain. And so it just makes sense that the more we know about it, the more we understand the cognitive processes and the subconscious processes that go into changing behavior, the better we're going to be able to help people change behavior, which is what learning is all about. What we've seen is an explosion of information in the past couple of decades because of improved scientific instruments like the functional magnetic resonance imaging machine that lets us watch an active human brain in the very act of learning. And so we've discovered a lot of things from there. Now, because it's a very broad science, it's really a discipline of multiple sciences, there are other discoveries that don't necessarily have immediate impact on learning. And here's where I think people get hung up. Just because there's a study that might seem a bit esoteric and you can't immediately figure out, well, how does that apply to the work I do as a leader or as a learning professional? That doesn't mean the entire science should be thrown out, because there's a great deal that is well documented, well founded, and is immediately applicable. And that's the area we focus on as the Brain Ladies.
Thank you. Ria, would you like to add to that?
Well, there's not much to add to that, but just one thing. When I heard Marjorie talk, is that in the field of learning and development, especially learning, there's a lot of bad science going on. When I started with neuroscience, it was like 15 years ago or so, and a lot of things in the field of learning and development, they were based on science that wasn't even true or relevant. And what struck me was that it was actually possible to underpin certain principles, for instance, that you have to repeat in order to make learning stick. It's very simple, but we already knew from brain science that that was actually the case. So I think that was something that surprised me when I started off doing things with neuroscience. And the other thing is that it really underpins certain insights. So it helped the field of learning and development to go to the really hard science, because you can actually see how it works and you can actually prove that it works. And so for a lot of technical companies that I work in, it's really underpinning that learning and development is important and that we can really change the brain. And since we are in a century of continuous change, I think that's the main issue, that people are really interested in applying neuroscience.
And I think for me, it's building on exactly what they've both said, but it's also about, it's the equivalent of, if you know how your car works really well, you can drive it better. If you know how a musical instrument works better, you can play it better. So it's about having the sort of the tools and technology to tweak, to twist, to make things, to improve things. So whether you're, a learning designer or a learning deliverer, or whether you're a learner yourself, if you understand a little bit about how learning happens, it becomes easier to actually adjust it to, either to poor training or to find ways that work for you and become a little bit of a better consumer of learning if you're actually learning. If you think of athletes, they all have coaches who help them understand their brains and their bodies. And for me, it's just the same at work, that if we can understand what we do, we can improve what we do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So sort of, I think they were slightly touched on in what you've all said. But do you think the term of neuroscience might put people off initially, who are in learning development and might think, I don't know much about science. Science was never my strong point, and obviously it being brain science. Have you come across that in your experiences? Stella, start with you, please.
I actually haven't. I found most people are really interested, but I do think it depends how you talk about it. So initially, certainly, we always used to talk about brain-friendly learning. Everybody's got a brain. Friendly sounds like it's going to be something that's not going to be too terrifying. Now we've started to use the word neuroscience far more because people are, it's out there. It's a word that's got out into the world. It's escaped, and I think my experience has been most people actually find it really interesting and want to know more about it. I think there's more and more on TV and things. So I think people are a bit less frightened of it perhaps than they were in the past. But I would love to, I'd love to know what are perhaps some of the fears or the worries that people might have.
Yeah, I agree with Stella. I think a lot of people are very curious because we all have a brain and we want to know something about it. And I think a lot of people are very curious in how the brain works, and brain-friendly learning. That's something that everyone knows of now. So, and neuroscience is a broader concept. So I love the word neuroscience, but if you're working with clients, I don't think that you have to really address it as neuroscience. It's just, okay, this is how it works. And you can just show it instead of making it all about the science.
I agree. This is Margie. I just wanted to jump in and add that it is important, however, because they're trusting you to understand the science, that you're ready to explain it or to demonstrate that what you're recommending is grounded in the science, and that balance is something that we strive to strike, right?
I agree, and I think something I'd also add is that some of the people who I think are frightened of us using the word neuroscience in work are some of the neuroscientists themselves. I think they're worried that, as does happen, myths get out into the world, people overgeneralize from one study to this is true of everything that ever happens. So I think some of the people who are most frightened about it are the neuroscientists themselves. And in some ways that's a bit like perhaps lawyers and accountants wanting to keep things to themselves, wanting to keep things secret because it gives them power. I think once people understand their brain, they're going to be far more interested in the real science. The more they get to understand, the more the science is going to be good. And that, in my view, is better for neuroscientists as well as the rest of us.
I completely agree with you on that, Stella. That's a really good point. I think it's a very interesting thing to learn about and to be able to continue learning about it and learn ways that you can apply it in the workforce to improve yourself, your teams, your productivity. I think that's excellent. One thing that has popped up in conversations with people about neuroscience is that initially it seems to be aimed at very sort of office-based and white-collar roles, and maybe not as applicable in other types of industries. If Margie, you'd like to give any thoughts on that, please?
Absolutely. It may have seemed that way, possibly because it just happened that those might have been the groups that were most interested in the beginning. But there's actually very powerful evidence that because, again, to Stella's point, we all have a brain, or maybe it was Rhea who said that, but it applies to all of us and to all nature of work. Learning new things, whether you're doing it inside an office or in the field or in some other kind of setting, there are many opportunities to apply an understanding of how the brain works. For example, let's say that you are teaching people in a factory to perform a repeating task, to say, put something together. Well, there are studies, and again, here's where we have to be careful not to overgeneralize, but there are some studies that indicate that playing certain types of music with certain rhythms will affect the productivity of those repetitive tasks. And so we have intuitively known this. Many people play music while they're cleaning house or while they're working in front of the computer because they know that makes them more productive. With the science behind it, we can apply that to a large group and we can measure and see that we get a change, an improvement in results. So it's certainly not just about a knowledge worker or a person who is sitting at a desk.
Yeah, maybe I can add something to it, because I work a lot with children, children from primary schools, and learning. If I teach them about how the brain works, it actually really helps them to understand how they have to study, and if they want to achieve something, what they have to do, what kind of effort they have to make. And there are children from 10, 11, 12 maybe, and they really love it. So it's not just high end. I think it's also very applicable to schools and teachers and children.
Oh,
And I think-
absolutely, Ria. I'm sorry to jump in. I just wanted to echo my agreement there, and I love that work that you're doing.
And I was going to say that there's a whole industry out there where people are working with machinery and understanding the neuroscience and the technology behind sort of stuff around the man-machine interface. If we can make machines easier, safer, more effective to use by understanding what's going on in people's brains when they're using these kind of tools, again, that's another application. Or making it easier to learn how to use these machines intuitively. That's another application where it could very easily go well beyond the white collar worker.
And I thought of one more example in this area to really show the breadth and the potential impact of this line of study. One of my clients is in the aerospace industry, and what they do is they are very concerned about the fatigue factor for an airline pilot. And so there are instruments that track their eye movements and can determine the level of cognitive load that they're experiencing, because they have to scan and watch all these instruments to keep the plane flying properly. But as they start to get tired, they start to develop a tunnel vision. They stop scanning as broadly, and they might miss an alert that's out in the peripheral of their instrument panel. And so as a result of information they got directly from neuroscience, they re-engineered their panel to recognize when that was happening and move the most critical displays to the dead center of the display so they would not be missed by a tired pilot. So that's an example of how deeply we can go with making things safer, to Stella's point.
And I'd add to that, it'd be great if, senior decision makers, and I'm thinking probably more likely to be politicians and people here, understood the challenges of, sleep deprivation, tiredness to decision making, and stopped making incredibly important decisions at 3 o'clock in the morning that affect all of us.
Absolutely. And we could get going on the terrible thing we do with training doctors, where we keep these young doctors up for terribly long shifts. And we all know humans don't perform at their best without sleep. So, and we do it to the most critical roles. We have them sleep deprived on a regular basis.
Okay, some really interesting insights there, especially about the pilots. Really enjoyed that. Ria, I'd like to come back to you because you've just touched on another point that I was going to raise, which was looking at how different generations or even different groups are some more open to using neuroscience than others in your experience so far.
I think it's I don't think it's something that young people love more than older people, because in my clients are sometimes older people who want to get their brain active and want to know something about how can I change, how can I still be productive, and so on. So they love the science of the brain, and there are children who also love science of the brain. So I don't think that's quite different in generations. What we do see is that it depends on what kind of company people work in. There are a lot of companies who really love the idea of science based learning within their organizations, and that actually helps to apply neuroscience to learning and development. But I don't see a lot of difference between generations. So I'm not quite sure if Margie and Stella have the same experience, but for me, it's not such a big difference.
I've worked with university students and university professors, and there's no difference. You know, I think it's individual. Some people really, really love it. Some people perhaps find it interesting, but are less inclined to, you know, dig deeper. But I think it's something that, you know, everybody has a brain. I think if you've said this now, everybody has a brain. They're really personal to us. So I think for most people, it feels like this is something personal I'm learning about myself. And I think for most people, that's a really positive thing.
Yes, I agree.
I agree too. And I think that's one of those myths. We see an awfully lot written and spoken about these generational differences. And I'm not saying there aren't a few, but we tend to exaggerate the differences instead of focus on the overwhelming similarities. A brain is a brain. You know, we may as well talk about that this generation's heart is a little bit different than another generation's. I mean, they're both organs in the body and they perform a function and the same function. And so it's really more about personal experience and personal attention that matters, not how old you are. And so I think it's really important that we get that point across.
Yes, maybe I can add something to it, because sometimes when I work with teams, there are different generations in a team, and I actually encourage them to work together. Like if you are 20, work with someone who's 50, because, you know, they have different brains, so they can really add to each other's experiences and qualities. That's actually what I actively do within organizations. So make use of the different brains that are working in the teams, and they really love that part, because that's, so for some it's the first time that they really talk to an older people or younger people and see the advantages of different brains, different experiences and different qualities. So I think it's just an advantage instead of something that's really a bug in applying neuroscience. And
I think there's another difference amongst, you know, younger people and older people, not whether they like neuroscience or not, but younger people tend to be at their best, at their freshest in the afternoon, older people in the morning. So actually, if you've got an organization where you've got a diversity of people across the organization, you can actually have, you know, set up your business so that you've got the people, you've always got somebody feeling fresh and alert and ready to go. And I think, you know, even small insights like that could make a big difference to business. They certainly have made a big difference in schools around the world.
That's really interesting. I'm personally not a fan of these, you know, sort of sweeping generalizations of different generations. And I agree, it probably depends more on the individual. So it's good to hear that sort of feedback on that. That's really encouraging. So I'd like to talk about the white paper that you've created, which is downloadable for free off the Brain Ladies website, brainladies.com. And this white paper gives some really interesting insights and a really good overview into it. And so you just talk briefly about how people can just use the white paper initially.
So I guess it's to give people, we did it by asking questions, and it was the sort of questions that we get asked regularly. So we thought, well, let's try and answer those. You know, how can we improve people's performance with neuroscience? How can we help them communicate better with neuroscience? So we really just tried to answer some of those really common questions. So I think it's useful for people to have a read of the paper, see if there's some things they will recognise. Some of them they'll recognise because it's good stuff they're already doing, and it just provides some backup to say, carry on doing what you're doing. Some of it they might think, well, that's new and I hadn't thought of doing it that way, and I didn't know that would be a better way. So I think that's, you know, that's useful new learning. And then if you are interested, really it's about coming to talk to us more directly, because it, you know, the white paper really is an overview of a conglomeration of everything we all do, but we all have our own sort of specialities. We all have our own particular types of clients we work with. So I think really it's about giving people an opportunity to explore and then come and explore further.
Thank you. Ria, do you have anything to add on the white paper, or did Stella cover those points?
Well, I think writing the white paper was also a way of getting to know each other a little bit better. And it did give some insights to us too. Like, it's not just what the science says in our country, but it's worldwide. So it was really interesting to make the paper and to see that we all have this, we all get the same questions. It doesn't really matter on in which country you are, you get the same questions about neuroscience. So I think it's for people just to get to know what the brain ladies are and get some insights, but it's a starting point, I guess.
Thank you. Margie, have you anything further to add on the white paper?
Well, I would just echo everything that my fellow brain ladies have said. And just to let people know that we wrote it to give you straight answers based in science. There are resources for you to dig further if you want. But we made sure that we kept the tone. We wrote it pretty much the way we would answer it if you asked us, if we were speaking in a format like this. So we wanted it to be accessible to everybody and to be the starting point of conversations. We hope many conversations with the people who read the paper and who want to continue conversations with us and see how we might apply some of these principles to their organizations.
And I think what was interesting was we all kind of were able, whilst writing it, to exhibit our own particular either quirks or idiosyncrasies or skills in particular ways. So we all had different kinds of input into the paper to come together to produce one paper, which was a fun way of working.
Excellent. So I'd like to finish up leading on to that. So how do you envision the future for the brain ladies, and encouraging the use of neuroscience in the workplace, moving on from the white paper and going visiting clients? So how do you see the future unfolding in that respect, Stella?
Shall I start with an answer, Fiona?
Yes, please.
Because I just finished a proposal today for the ATDIs in May 2020, and well, that's actually one of our goals is to see each other and to work together, because I think we get to a deeper insight and can do better things for clients. Well, if we really expand our knowledge and work together and work as a team. So that's actually what we would really love to have a broader group of people that think, okay, like the Brain Ladies, that's an international group, it's a global group, and it's not just a neuroscience that's from our university, but it's much broader than that. And I think that's this is the first step, and we would like to continue, do some speaker session workshops and work together more to see where it goes from there. So there is not a real there's not a big plan for over 10 years, but we'll see how it goes. But just expand our passion of the brain and our insights. I think that's our main goal.
And I think one of the things we can do is support each other. So, we're all fairly small businesses. We've each got sets of clients, but, often we may get asked to do something. As an example, I have a client in San Francisco, and it's not going to be super convenient for me to fly to San Francisco that particular week. So I want to talk to Margie about perhaps she can do the work for this particular client, and we'll have that confidence that we have that deeper understanding of how neuroscience works, of how to deliver using the principles that we all believe in. So I think it'll help us, to support our clients better and cut down on airfares.
I totally agree. And of course, we're going to continue. As you said, we all have our own businesses. There'll be times when we are focused on something that is specific just to us and our relationships. But more and more, the reason we came together was to work together and to share our understanding. And even just, for example, Stella has a wonderful book coming out. I'm sure you're going to tell us all about it in a minute, Stella. But we all had an opportunity to read an earlier version of it. And I was very honored that she asked us for feedback. So that's part of that creative and collegial process that we hope to continue, that I think will make us all better. And as a result, we're just naturally going to work and support each other more and more.
And I think one of the really nice things I've found is how very collaborative we've been. It would be very easy to compete, but I think we feel like we're getting more out of it. We're going to support our clients, other businesses better by collaborating and sharing. And thank you very much for mentioning my book, Margie. Which I'll give it a plug, shall I, while I'm here? So it's
yes, go ahead.
The second edition of Neuroscience for Learning and Development. It's now available in English, Chinese, Arabic, and shortly in Italian. I'm really keen if anybody would like it published in Spanish, whether that's in South America or Spain. I'd love to hear from somebody. But yeah, so it's the second edition coming out on Saturday. And actually, we're running an online digital book launch starting tomorrow if anybody's interested. So ask me for more details.
And Saturday is the 3rd of August, that's right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, lovely. Congratulations, Stella, on all the languages that you're translated in.
Thank you, Ria.
Great. Yeah, not in Dutch yet.
No, that's another one we need to get into.
Yeah.
But then you've got your book.
Yeah, my book is also coming out, I think, end of August, but it's only in Dutch. But yeah, well, the Dutch market also needs a book, so they can read mine. And we'll just take it from there, and then we'll get your book translated. So there will be an English book that will also be very nice.
Well, and I'll jump in. I have a book that will be coming out in August. I don't have a date yet. It's called The Brain Matters Coloring Book. And
wow.
So I've taken all these beautiful black and white drawings of the brain and different parts of the brain, and explained a little bit about what you're looking at, and encouraged people to grab some crayons, colored pencils, whatever you want, and fill it in. And the process of coloring, there's a great deal of science to it, which is one reason why these adult coloring books have become so popular. So I saw that trend and said, oh my goodness, the brain is a perfect subject for a coloring book. So you will be able to pre-order that on my website within a week or two.
And that is so exciting, Margie. Sorry, we're just diving in now on conversation. That's so exciting, Margie, because there is a brain colouring in book that is so technical, so advanced. The pictures are nice, but the text is so dense. It's absolutely impossible to read. In this particular book that I have currently got, and I so want yours, it takes 2 pages for them to explain how to colour in.
Oh, I took a completely different approach. And as you know, I'm all about trying to keep the science accessible. So I think you'll enjoy the difference. And I don't care what colors you use. The important thing is that you experience it. And as we all know, our brain is distributed through our entire body, through the nervous system. And so it's in your fingertips. And so when you make choices about colors, you are engaging a lot of very important connections in your brain. So I think it's actually very important to allow people, unless they are studying anatomy, in which case the actual color might be important, to allow people to pick their own colors.
It's lovely, agree. Margie.
Sounds great.
That does sound interesting. We actually have a wellness week here at Emerald, which is usually in autumn. And in the last couple of years, we have done some adult colouring sessions, like as group sessions together. So I don't know whether I can get them to bulk order some of your books, Margie.
Well, why don't you do a package? You could get all the Brain Ladies books and really have a wonderful collection for your team.
That sounds great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to end it there. Again, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to talk to me. It's been really good. I really appreciate it, and I'd really like to do another session further down the line, or something else with yourselves, either individually or as your collective, as the Brain Ladies. I think you've got a lot of use that you could have for us here at Emerald, or just, you know, generally talk more about learning development and neuroscience. You know, obviously it's a huge topic and there's so much more we could discuss. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Fiona, and it was really lovely to catch up with you, Margie, and Ria too, and we'll wave to Cataline, who's on her holidays.
Yes.
It's also good for the brain to be on holidays. So,
Indeed.
yeah, and thank you, Fiona.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I've really enjoyed it. And much love to Cataline.